Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. This is Ayman Tarabishi with the International Council for Small Business. This is an amazing live webinar we're doing today, and I am just personally delighted to be doing this. And we've been talking about this now for a couple of years, Alex, here and about this webinar. But first, let's officially introduce Dr. Alex DeNoble, professor at San Diego State University, an ICSB board member, and a very, very dear friend. And he has a lot going on in his life right now. But more importantly, he has a new book out that is something that he's been talking about for quite some time, but he was very entrepreneurial and he put it together. So Alex, first, let's introduce you. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself so everybody knows about you, and then we'll get into the book and we'll get into all the aspects of the book.
Right. Well, thank you, Ayman. It's always a pleasure to be here and connect and have a chance to chat with you. So for the audience, my name is Alex DeNoble. I am a professor, as Ayman said, at San Diego State University. I have been serving as executive director of our school's Lavin Entrepreneurship Center on the campus, where we really focus on developing the next generation of entrepreneurs through both our curricular and co-curricular activities that we run through the center. I am very involved with our professional organizations, and I'm pleased to serve as a member of the board of the International Council for Small Business.
Great, Alex, thank you very much. So we are all excited, and it's been, again, a long time coming. You just recently published a book called The Entrepreneur Within, which is why we're having this webinar. So this has been a passion of yours now for quite some time. So before we get into the book, before we get into the title of the book and everything about the book here, tell us a little bit about, how it all started, the genesis of all the book and where your idea came from and how the path, the roadmap to eventually to getting to write the book. So I'm curious about this. A lot of people say, "Oh, I'm going to write a book," but right. Saying something and doing something is two different things. So tell us a little bit.
I have a coffee mug at home, and it says, "Well done is better than well said." It's a quote by Benjamin Franklin, and I've been saying I was going to write a book for a long time. I am completing my 40th year on the faculty at San Diego State, and I've had a wonderful career as a professor and professional academic, researcher, educator, and so much more. And I've always wanted to write a book. I could write academic articles, I can publish in that mode, but I wanted to write a book. And I've had so many false starts on that until I learned. I was judging in an award category at ICSB for pedagogy, and I met a guy named Eric Koster. Eric teaches at Georgetown University, and he walked in and said, "Well, in my entrepreneurship class, I teach my students to write books." And that really piqued my interest. And from there, I said, well, I want to take that kind of a class. I want to write a book. And I found out that he had this book creators group, and I said, okay, it's time. And then I started searching for the topic. I wanted to learn how to write. So I had to pick some low-hanging fruit, and I said, now what could I do? And over the last 10, 12 years, I've been teaching corporate entrepreneurship at Aalto University in Helsinki, Finland, Setis University in Baja California, Mexico, and doing some training here at my own university, San Diego State, and working with companies like Qualcomm, Siemens, San Diego Gas and Electric. I've encountered so many corporate entrepreneurs. So I said, I'll write the book about corporate entrepreneurship. It's a topic I know. And I said, I'm going to use this topic to learn how to write the book. And that was the genesis of it, Ayman. I wanted to learn how to write a book, and I wanted to do it with a topic that I felt very comfortable with.
Well, we all know, at least in the ICSB, and also I believe in the ICSB community, you are one of the foremost experts on corporate entrepreneurship. So it makes sense to me. You write on something that you are one of the leading experts in the world on it here. And the passion, what I'm hearing you saying here, it was a moment of passion that's been kind of on low simmer in a way in the back of your mind, saying one day I'm going to write it. And then the trigger was you hearing about, a class to how to write a book.
Mhm.
But all these motions have gotten you to a point where you say, okay, I'm actually going to do it.
Right.
But I want to go a little bit deeper. Saying I'm going to do it and then actually sitting down and doing it are two separate things.
Mhm.
So could you remember the moment where you sat in front of your computer, took out the first page on your laptop and said, okay, this is going to be the introduction of my book? Do you remember that moment and kind of what was going through your mind?
Yeah, in a sense, you're talking about the moment of page one.
Yes.
Write this book,
Yes.
and that's where I had so many false starts before. Starting to write a book, open it up in page one, and writing the book. And I've outlined chapters before and things like that. But I learned a technique in the book creators group. I learned a technique called snippets and writing ugly. Those were two lessons for me. And so I just started writing little paragraphs. So after a while, I had all these little paragraphs and thoughts about what I wanted to do. And it was like a puzzle. And so I started moving the puzzle pieces around, and I kept shifting it and shifting it. But the most important thing, Ayman, is writing a book like this really requires storytelling, and relating stories back to frameworks that you want to develop. Now, I understood the frameworks, and I had worked with many companies before. But I still worried. How am I going to get people to talk to get the stories that I'm looking for in the book? And I learned one thing. When people find out you're writing a book, everybody wants to talk to you. And so from that perspective, I started talking to people, and it was amazing how people just opened up and told incredible stories, and one led to another and to another. But what really got to me is that in corporate entrepreneurship, there's a lot of challenges. There's a lot of resistance. There's a lot of emotion tied up in it, and people really opened up and talked about their experiences and trying to move new ideas inside of their company. It was a snowball effect, and one interview led to another, to another, to another, and I began to imagine patterns. And so the patterns and the frameworks for the book began to emerge. I started with what I thought was a framework, but the framework that ultimately became part of the book, the backbone of the book, really emerged from all of these different conversations.
So let's get to the title of the book, The Entrepreneur Within.
Yeah.
And the name itself, the title itself, I believe, is very powerful because it instills or triggers this self-efficacy. It's this internal latent energy that you say you have it, you just don't know you have it, or you always had it and now it's time to come out. And So the title itself, I call it a charged title because it can connect with the person at whatever, at any level that they can think of. Saying from a simple simmer of a faint idea that maybe I can do this to, I know I have it. Now I need to move forward with it. Tell us a little bit about the moment where you said this is the title of the book, or the title came more easily for you, or is it something that you've been thinking about for a while?
Well, to answer that question of the moment when that title came into my head, I got to bring you into my shower.
The aha moment, the proverbial shower.
The shower. I was struggling with so many different, as the book began to emerge, there was no title to the book. And, you spend after a while, it just becomes within you. I mean, it's part of you. And the moment happened. It was an aha moment in a shower, literally, because I'm glad you picked up on the title has double meaning. Clearly, entrepreneurs inside or within existing organizations, I believe that's a phenomenon, and we can get into that. But it's also the entrepreneur within the individual. The perspective I took in this book is it's really based on mindset, developing an entrepreneurial mindset. And you bring up self-efficacy, that belief in your own abilities. There are challenges involved, both in a startup entrepreneurship mode and in corporate. But when that title came to my head, it just stuck, and it just, I wouldn't let it go. I mean, it just didn't I'll put it this way, it didn't let me go, and it became my title. Now, go ahead.
No, one of the things that you mentioned that with the title here, and you tie it to corporate entrepreneurship, we see now in the markets and what's ever happening here, but it's always been like this. But corporate entrepreneurship is a very complex topic. You know, it's you can unpack it, but the more you unpack, there's more layers to it here.
Right.
So, in simple, because a lot of people kind of nod their head when they say, "Oh, yeah, corporate entrepreneurship. I understand it," but you're the expert. You're the foremost expert on it.
Yeah.
Tell us in your own words how do you define, or what is your vision or meaning of corporate entrepreneurship? So at least we have something verbally from you saying, this is how I define or how I see corporate entrepreneurship, which is remarkable if you state it, because a lot of people understand it, but they never really write it down to understand it.
I've always, in my many years of teaching entrepreneurship, I really focus on context. And I believe that entrepreneurship, if you look at entrepreneurship from a mindset perspective, recognizing opportunities, being willing to evaluate and ultimately act on opportunities, that's part of an entrepreneurial mindset. And how that gets enacted, whether in a startup mode or in a corporate mode or in a nonprofit situation or even a government situation, public, it's about mindset. And so I look at and I had to tackle this issue because there are some naysayers out there. I mean, I've read a number of articles that say there's no such thing as a corporate entrepreneur because the corporate entrepreneur is not taking the risks of an entrepreneur. You know what? And I agree with that. They're not taking that kind of risk because they're taking other kinds of risks. And, the context matters with respect to entrepreneurship and the entrepreneurial mindset. So when I think about corporate entrepreneurship, I'm focused on people behaving entrepreneurially in this context inside of existing organizations?
Well, Alex, when you say individuals, working entrepreneurially within existing corporations, sometimes people get scared of this because these are the individuals that will shake things around. You know what I mean? These are the individuals that will look at policies and procedures as guidelines and not really as rules of the game type of thing. Right? And so you favor them a little bit, but give us a little bit of context. Is it entrepreneurship within an organization? And if it's a mindset of these individuals, then it's much more, because some organizations are very rigid, and some organizations are not. So explain that a little bit to us.
You know what? I mean, I tackle that to some extent in the early part of the book when I talk about the challenges that companies face in enacting entrepreneurship. And so it really has a lot to do with the environment within the company. Because, if an individual has this entrepreneurial mindset, they're going to innovate. They're going to bend rules. They're going to behave like mavericks inside of an organization. And some companies do have low tolerance for that. And that's a risk for organizations, I believe, because that's where the talent lies. That's where the innovative thinking and action comes from, to keep companies relevant in rapidly changing environments. I talk in the book about a punctuated equilibrium, and you and I have had talks before about my dinosaur examples of, paleontologists talk about punctuated equilibrium in the context of dinosaur life before the asteroid hit Earth and dinosaur life afterwards, because many species went extinct when hit by this asteroid, and yet other species learned to adapt. Punctuated equilibrium deals with beyond your control circumstances, like the COVID pandemic, like the emerging Industry 4.0 technologies, like our global concerns of climate change and so forth. These are exogenous factors that are changing the way we live, work, and play. And companies that are stuck in a status quo don't know how to react to such changes. And that's where the requirement, I think, for most companies to promote an environment for innovators to help companies adapt to these rapidly changing conditions.
And you talk about frameworks earlier, and that the book is based on frameworks. So in your book, you mentioned the framework, the FEI framework here. Explain that a little bit to us, because it is when we talk about innovation and we talk about the entrepreneur, sometimes it feels loose, but yet you create a framework for it that you say you conceive it as being loose, but it's not. There's a framework to it. So explain that to us.
Yeah, I'm in, I got to get personal with you again. That was another shower session. I was searching, like I said, I eat, sleep, live, and breathe when I was writing this book. And so I was searching for a way to capture all of these stories that people were telling me. And I was looking for patterns. And I wanted a simple way to relate these stories to different aspects. I started thinking about corporate entrepreneurship as a process when I look at it at the individual level. And a number of people, when you read the stories, were telling me how they had to frame their ideas so that decision makers could understand it and see it as making strategic sense for the company. So I started thinking about, wow, some of these stories really relate to the challenge of framing your idea so decision makers could support it. And then other people were telling me, even when I had that kind of support, I had to get the cooperation from different facets or different processes or different managers within the organization. I had to get their buy-in. So I'm thinking framing, buy-in, and when other people were telling me the challenges of, okay, I got all this support, but now I have to implement this thing. And that's where I said, no, can I really get away with the FBI framework? Could I do that? The FBI framework? But it started making sense to me. So I didn't want to get in trouble with the FBI. So I call it the FBI framework for corporate entrepreneurship. I know that's a mouthful, but I needed to differentiate it from before I had the FBI coming after me and saying, hey, you're taking our moniker.
So FBI for short.
FBI.
For short, we'll give you the long one, but we'll call it FBI for short. It is compelling, framing, buying, and implementing. Saying this, where do you think corporations get stuck in? If you're looking at these three aspects, where you say, well, it's really where they get stuck in this part or this part, or is it all equal?
Well, it's not all equal, but they can get stuck. There are roadblocks in any of those different areas. In the framing area, sometimes companies have criteria that the hurdles are too big to be met, because when somebody introduces a new idea, sometimes it's not big enough for the company to pay attention to early on. So there are roadblocks around framing the idea, getting that initial support. But then as I get into situations, even when you get top management to say, okay, go for it. Like one illustration in the book, I talk about my friend Joseph Kipe, who innovated a new idea within a food service company. And he had so much resistance from the production manager because they weren't set up for what he was proposing to do. He got resistance from the purchasing manager because they weren't set up business process-wise for what he was proposing to do. So, companies get hung up there. And then in the implementation phase, my story about Riju Kurtapal at Box, the corporation, moving into the pharmaceutical business, he had to hire a whole new sales staff that was knowledgeable about that particular industry, and that caused some initial challenges on the implementation phase. So companies can get hung up on any aspect of framing, buy-in, or implementation.
So what I like from what you're saying here is the one that I gravitate towards is the implementation side. Okay. And that's a personal opinion, because I believe, at least from a pedagogical standpoint, and what we teach in schools and stuff, we teach our students really well how to frame things.
Yeah, right.
Right. Here's the business model canvas, and here's the business plan, and here's the, here you go. You have all, let's spend all this time framing it. And then we give them a little bit of an appetizer on buy-in. So we create the competition, we create the new venture competition, or we create the business plan competition, and we give them, or we ask them to present in class. That's kind of the buy-in to see if anybody, right? but then we kind of drop them off the cliff when it comes to implementation. We're like, oh, yeah, great, well done on framing. You got some buy-in. Good luck, goodbye, and see you, type of thing. I don't know. That's how I feel. Well, how do you feel?
You know, I teach a whole class on that. It's called Managing the Growing Firm. It's a graduate class. I teach it with a venture capital friend of mine, and I'll tell you a story on that. I was introduced to him many years ago, a guy named Brian Dovey from Domain Associates. I was introduced to him by Jeff Timmons. Jeff was the father of academic entrepreneurship back in the day. And he said, he introduced me to Brian, and he came to visit me. And I was so proud of our entrepreneurship curriculum that we had developed, Diamond. And I showed it to Brian, and he had one observation for me. He said, Alex, everything you're teaching is wonderful. You're teaching your students to recognize opportunities, to evaluate, design a business model. He said, but what are you teaching students after day one? How do they manage the company? The operators. I was like a deer in headlights, Simon. For 20 seconds, I remember trying to come up with an answer, and I looked at him and I said, that's the course you and I are going to create. And we created this course, not focusing on evaluating the opportunity, but managing a company after it starts. That's where the action happens on the operational side. So I believe very strongly in what you're saying, and that's a big part of the implementation factor in the book.
So saying this, and this is where maybe the book is really interesting for people to read about, is that implementation aspect, right? And I think we got enough soup for the soul for how to frame things and how to get buy-in and do the pitch and how to perfect it. The implementation is the devil's in the details. It is, right. It is, you know, how to turn on the lights on and how to do this stuff. Based on your book, based on your stories that you have told, give us a little bit of insights. What is a successful implementation? You know, and I like the way you write ugly, right? Snippets. That's an example of an ugly implementation, but it works at the end. Give me some of these in the book so people can have a little bit more insights on this thing. Yeah, I've never thought of it this way.
You know, number of stories that are profiled in the book come to mind. My good friend Riju Kurtapal told me the story about how he helped his company Box, which is a collaborative cloud-based work tool that was industry agnostic. I mean, it was that tool could be used across a lot of, you know, applications. But going into the pharmaceutical industry, which was really lucrative, where they didn't really have a presence, that was a different story because of all the regulations around data protection and privacy and so forth. In that mode, they had to bring in a whole new sales force. They had to bring in a whole new marketing team, and he had to lead that effort. The difficulties involved were amazing. I mean, in terms of having to change a culture and get the marketing managers, the sales managers, the other kinds of people that were needed to work in a very specialized area that was counter to the core business, even though it was still working in a collaborative working tool. The implementation part for him was the real challenge of building that kind of a sales force that could operate in that mode. And it took a lot of time because they didn't have the credibility in that space, and they had to build it up, and it had to be ugly early on until they could get their foothold into that market space. That's just one example.
That's a great example. But you said a word here that triggered a reaction in my mind. Is culture, right? Everybody throws the word around culture. You know, oh, we need to change the culture of the organization. We need to make the organizational entrepreneurial culture. We need to do innovative. You know, culture is a very tricky word. You know, it's as Shine will say, it's a slow living organism that is very complex, that it takes time to change, you know. And if you look at Shine's work, you have, you know, your basic artifacts, then you have your values, and then eventually you have your assumptions, the triangle of Shine's culture definition. You mentioned it a couple of times. Explain to me culture, because it's not easy. You turn on the light and you turn off the lights and culture changes. This is a slow moving, resisting system that fights back if you try to change it.
You know, our good friends, Don Karatko and Jeff Hornsby and Jeff Coven, good friends of ours that developed this instrument called the CEAI, the Corporate Entrepreneurship Assessment Instrument. And it really talks about the environment or culture, if you will, of an organization. Is it conducive or inhibitive of entrepreneurial or innovative behavior inside of the company? When I think of culture in that sense, to what degree is innovation and failure tolerated? What's the risk propensity? Do people have work discretion to try things other than predefined processes? This notion of work discretion, reward and measurement system. These are all, whoa, tools. I mean, wow. Ayman, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. We're all
Okay.
good.
All right, because my screen is gone blank on me here, but anyway.
We can see you. I can hear you very clearly.
Okay, good. These are all tools. These are all tools that, or levers, if you will, that define to what degree does a company support innovative behavior in the organization. So when I think about time availability, I think about work discretion, I think about autonomy to be able to innovate. I think about risk tolerance and resource willingness to invest resources in new ideas as important contributors to a culture of innovation.
I like this. The propensity for an organization to have the culture to change or to be innovative. I like the way you frame this. In doing so, it makes sense, or logically, you can say that the startups are more amenable to these changes. That's the whole point of a startup, to pivot, to move, to change, and stuff like that. But organizations that are in their life cycle, that have, you know, continued to grow and achieve and accomplish, the likelihood of changing very fast or having this culture of change or innovation gets less and less, because they have bureaucracy, they have systems in place.
Yes.
And that's it goes back to corporate entrepreneurship. So what do you say about those organizations that are not that startup mode, that are in a long path here, saying that we are now established? Yeah.
You know what? I mean, the word bureaucracy in my mind has a very negative connotation to it. You know, when you think of bureaucracy, you think of hierarchies of decision-making and approval processes that lead to slow kinds of decision-making, okay? But when I talk about entrepreneurship and corporate entrepreneurship, as a company goes from a concept to a commercial-ready venture and then ultimately an operating company, to derive the benefits of your innovation, it requires systems, rules, policies, procedures that are designed to protect the core business. And it's rational and it makes a lot of sense. Now, the challenge for companies is how do you maintain your existing systems that are designed to promote core business activities while simultaneously creating the environment for new ideas to have a chance to flourish? Because that's where a lot of the resistance is going to come from. Jealousies, if you will, in terms of time availability versus people working in the core business, or reward and measurement systems that are different for people working in core business versus new business. It creates the tensions that we frequently talk about in the field of corporate entrepreneurship. I think that bureaucracy gets a bad rap. You know, it has this negative connotation to it because it depicts hierarchies of decision making that are slow and immobile and non-reactive, non-adaptive kind of approach. When I talk about emerging businesses going from a concept for a new idea to a commercial-ready venture and then trying to grow the business, it requires systems, rules, policies, procedures that are going to enable scalability. And so business processes emerge to support the status quo, or not the status quo. Business processes emerge to support the core business activities. And so as a company matures and starts hopefully deriving profits from their innovations, deriving those economic rents from their innovations, business processes emerge to support those kinds of activities, and that makes a lot of sense, and it's important. What happens, however, when someone introduces something new that requires different processes, rules, or procedures that are run counter to the bureaucratic approach, that's where the tensions come in. Can a company be ambidextrous? Can a company have systems in place to support and grow core business while also being adaptive and flexible enough to promote new business activities? And that's a challenge, and not every company can handle that very effectively.
Yeah, it reminds me of GM and Saturn, the company that they spun out. I don't know if you remember.
Yeah.
They spun out a whole different company, and then they had to shut it down. And so we have about 10 minutes left. A little bit about the book itself as we come back, because a lot of things we discussed were in the book here. But for the individuals, for the educator, for the person, for the researcher, for the student, and for just a regular practitioner or the person that's working in a startup or a company, why the book? You know, what is it that they'll find in the book And aside from these great stories that you mentioned, and what is it that they say, you should, this is a neat book because of this. I can tell you some of the things, but I want you to say.
Okay, yeah. I mean, why the book? I mean, a lot of what I've read and work with in my classes on corporate entrepreneurship really focus at the organizational level. How do we create the environment for entrepreneurship? So it's at a corporate, at that organization level. What I wanted to do with this book is take it from the individual's level, because I believe that anybody can experience, and that's the title of my book. You don't have to quit your day job to experience entrepreneurship. So I'm talking to people who, for one reason or another, think about individuals working with companies. They have young families, they have kids, they have, they're thinking about tuitions that they have to pay. They have healthcare, they have mortgages, they have, all of these other obligations that may preclude a startup entrepreneurship path for people. And so I wrote this book for people, whether they're in a corporate environment for because it makes sense for their family perspective, or whether they desire to grow and develop their career in a corporation or a large organization. I wrote this book for them because I believe that anybody can learn to behave like an entrepreneur and be a catalyst for change within existing organizations. But what I also realized as I work with many different companies in exec ed training and so forth, people don't have a context of how to do it. I come up with an idea and they get frustrated because they don't know how to present that idea effectively within the organization and get the buy-in that they needed. So what I wanted to do with this book was to provide frameworks and approaches that one could take systematically, if you will, to increase your chances of getting your ideas supported, recognized, and enacted within companies.
I think this is a great way to explain the book and the rationale of the book. And in my own words, you have a very compelling story to tell, and you've been a student to the father of entrepreneurship education, so you're a disciple, if you may, and cultures continue because of disciples and storytelling, and with your 30+ years of experience, your global impact, and all the people that you have worked with, and with the Lavin Center and the CEAS conference that's coming up soon as well. This book is a nice touch to the continuation of the storyline. I think this is where the future lies, is that when somebody picks up this book and he sees this, they walk away with an understanding that it is more of a mindset, but also it is about sitting down and actually doing the work. And having false starts, as you mentioned a couple of times, but at the end, it is a job well done. And so I think with the book, it's a job well done. I know you went through a whole adventure of publishing the book as well, but that's an entrepreneurial perspective.
A whole other story in itself.
So that is something that is interesting to talk about as well. But we on ICSB, on behalf of the ICSB board and members and everybody, we appreciate your time that you spent with us talking about your book, and also all your efforts and contributions, and just making a world a better place, in the sense that if you impact one student, that can have the butterfly effect that can change the trajectory of many other things here. So Alex, thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it. And this has been streamed on Facebook. We'll put it on our website as well. The full session here, we almost spent an hour on this and could have gone for another hour as well. But thank you very much.
Ayman, thank you. It's always a pleasure working with you and having discussions like this. I look forward to many more opportunities.
Thank you. You have a great day. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.